Yeah, I'm just turning my phone off. There we go.
Hello, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Miriam, thank you for having me. Nice to be with you.
Yes, I am super excited to talk about Circl facilitation online on Circl.es.
As am I. Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're up to and what I've noticed and learned. And I'm so inspired by what you're doing. It's a blessing to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we are going down that rabbit hole, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
I think maybe when you sent me the form to fill out for this interview.
I love it.
That's a great question. In 1998, I attended my first like small group gathering and watched a man who's now who's been a mentor to me for years do his thing. And that was like the first day of me apprenticing. And there's so many terms for it: moderator, guide, facilitator. But something about that moment set me on this path. And only when I hung out my shingle as like a professional did I start using the F word. So I think that was probably around 2007 that I got more formal with the work and went out on my own for in a consulting capacity.
So what makes the difference for you between a moderator, a facilitator, a consultant, a guide?
Yeah. The job to be done to me is always the fork in the road. What am I being hired to do? What is the outcome? What is the objective of coming together? And that tends to beg then what word we're going to use for the person doing it. So to me, a moderator is somebody who is skilled at catalyzing and injecting into conversation towards a desired or an emergent end. A facilitator, and by the way, this is one opinion, there's lots of others, but to me, something about facilitation is not passive, but a little more leading from the side. And I often talk about, like facilitators make things facile, they make things easier. That a lot of times what I am paid to do and certify others to do is to make a hard thing a little bit easier. And so that's where I use things like facilitator. And then there's guide, and there's a lot of other terms, but I like to focus more on the commonality among all these terms rather than what distinguishes them, and try to rally the people that all have their niches in the marketplace into this common thing that we're all doing. It's like, can we simmer it down to this probably 2, 3, 4 things that bind us together as people that are paid to do this work, rather than like being married to these very specific terms. So I haven't thought too much about what the difference is, more about I've observed what's common across these traditions. That makes sense.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I always find it interesting, the different perspectives on what facilitation means, because it's not a protected term. So basically everyone can call themselves a facilitator, and then still it means something different to all of us. And then some would avoid using the F word, as you said, at all costs, because they don't identify as it, and others wear it as a kind of something they're proud of and that they've earned. So I always enjoy the answers to this apparently difficult question.
The same used to be true of the word coach. I remember even in the like late 80s, early 90s, I'm in my late 70s now. That everybody was calling themselves a coach at one point. And then there's the International Coach Federation, who they didn't create the term, but they created an accreditation system. And there's many other organizations as well. So it became more formal, and there became some rigor around use of that term, or not. And of course, there's other people that are doing their thing, which is beautiful. And there's something happening around facilitation as well. I have a certification program. I know many others that also do, and I am curious about each person's take on the term before it becomes so much of an industry. There's something also about facilitation that's how it's like distinct from coaching is it's not true that that coaches or executive coaches make for great facilitators. It's not true. They can, but it's different. It's distinct. It's not about I'm a subject matter expert. It's a facilitation is something that I feel like is more accessible by more people. Not anyone can do it, but anyone can potentially do it because it taps into innate human instincts to want to serve and hold space for others. That's different than I'm a coach and I've gotten great at advising you on a hiring plan or on operations. So I see the terms going in a parallel way as far as it used to be the Wild West and the open market, but there's something about facilitation that's still very homegrown. And I like that. I like that aspect of facilitation.
And since you mentioned that you're having an accreditation certification program as well, what are the key skills for you that would make a good facilitator?
One of the things that I have been encouraged to do by our founder at Circl.es, our CEO, who has decades of experience participating in his own forum, his own small group of executives, is to get clear on what is basic. And then there's a whole set of advanced facilitation skills. But he'll say, Jonathan, if people did nothing else, if they only did these 2, 3, 4 things, would that lead to kind of a baseline great session? And what we've come to learn, and this is, I'm challenged always not to be pedantic or prescriptive of these things. I've enjoyed getting to a place, Miriam, where I've observed what has tended to be true in the tradition of small group gatherings. Long before Circl.es, long before the internet, people have come together in small groups for whatever purpose. And what tends to be true about the people that hold space of those small groups are 3 things in our experience, in our judgment. And I certify for energy, timing, and flow. I keep using this refrain: energy, timing, and flow. It's not about wowing them, blowing their minds with like fantastic features or that witty thing you said. I encourage my guides, my facilitators, to notice that instinct to want to be advanced or a black belt right away and to let it go and simply focus on energy, timing, and flow, which I then define what those 3 things mean. And we've built a digital feature set that helps support getting those things done.
Where would you distinguish energy and flow?
Yeah, well, there's definitely overlap. There's definitely gray area. They're not mutually exclusive. If you're not noticing and fueling a flow, if you're not emergent and following the thread of an organic conversation, you're going to impose your energy on the existing energy. So they definitely overlap. If you're not paying attention to timing, you're going to be disrupting the natural energy of the group. So they're not mutually exclusive. When I talk about energy, though, to be clearer, I talk about judicious use of things like our group chat, saying hello to people, starting with handpicked music, kind of walk-on music, we call it. Knowing when to modulate your voice to like respond to the tone of the moment. And flow is like, have you noticed when silence may be appropriate? I actually like uncomfortable silence. I like when sessions I'm facilitating get a little uncomfortable because it means somebody's up against a wall there somewhere. Or could you catalyze it? Could you inject yourself? Could put a little fuel into the fire a little bit because you've noticed that it needs a boost? So they're definitely not mutually exclusive. There's overlap, but it's really resonated when I've rolled this out as energy, timing, and flow. And then of course, our technology that helps make it happen at scale easily. But whether it's online or not, when I write and talk about these three basic skills and letting everything else go, people tend to nod their heads. I don't know. What do you think? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I was trying to find a place to distinguish the energy and flow part. And listening to you, I wonder whether energy is more something intangible. So it's something that binds the group together. Is the energy up? Is it creative, positive, or is it rather contemplative, down, or is there conflict in the room? Whereas flow is more maybe tangible and related to the process. So when are moments to halt and to be silent? When are there moments for small group conversations, or to share, or to take notes individually?
I think that's in my judgment, mostly right on. And there's also an element of energy that is intentional.
Mhm.
It's something you designed for, at least at the start of a session. It's something you planned for, you set the table for, you set the space. I tell my guides that it's like producing a well-run TV show. Have you got in the room early, fixed your hair, made sure you're the first one there? Are they looking at page one of your planned agenda? Have you pushed the button to start the music? Flow is something to sense and respond to. So the companion skills to energy, timing, flow, I say also are being able to sense and respond, which is like the yoga of facilitation. I say you're never going to perfect that. The skill of being able to notice what needs to happen in the room, the sensing and responding element, we're starting to get into more like advanced skills in my judgment. And then modeling these are the two companion pieces to energy, timing, and flow. Are you modeling the quality of conversation that you intend for your participants? Are you adhering to the norms, knowing that you will lose your integrity with your group if you're not practicing what you preach? And so I always tell my guides, one very practical, tangible measurement of your modeling is, did you end on time? I say,
Mm.
no matter what, you have to end on time. You're asking them to arrive on time, respect their time, plan for after the session, and you got to end on time, because they will tune out in the next session when you review the norms if you haven't kept your promise to them in the last session. So I like to give my guides a foothold to take that philosophy and the methodology into a very, very practical skill, which is end on time. That's something they can kind of latch on to and be measured by, frankly. And we talk about it. How to enforce norms, we're starting into it like advanced skills now. What happens when a session goes off the rails? So these core skills, energy, timing, and flow, modeling, sensing, and responding, you're never done perfecting them, but they're gateways to then these, for some of my lifers, some of these like bigger advanced skills conversations.
I like that. And I like that you highlight the fact of almost consistency. We ask them to be on time, so it's our job to end on time and to
Yeah.
fulfill our end of the contract, basically.
When I sit with my CEO, with my partner in crime, Dan Hoffman, we use analogies from the American movie The Karate Kid. We just say it's just wax on, wax off, just paint the fence. And it's, if you don't know the movie, it's if you go through the muscle memory of continuing to move in one direction, and then when something comes at you, you may not even realize you have developed the skill set to respond. And I tell my guides all the time, when push comes to shove, don't overthink it. Just wax on, wax off. Just continue to employ the basics. In a yoga analogy, it's just, you could be doing yoga for 30 years, still wake up in the morning and do your down dog and push you to a yet greater edge this day. So I love letting myself and others off the hook of feeling like I need to be an expert, and I'm continuing to learn. And I hope I'm at a place with my ego and mentally where I can gladly spend the next 30 years learning the basics and even deeper. So, it's also like we live in a world mirroring where everybody wants to position themselves as an expert.
Mm.
Everybody has their niche of who they work with and what their skill set is. And that's great. I have enjoyed letting all that go and being a student of fewer things, knowing I'm going to get it wrong. And I get it wrong every day. And I work with for a company that allows us all to let us fail and learn. And the sky isn't falling. If I led a session yesterday with 7 CEOs, and I said something that I thought was so brilliant. And one of the participants said, I totally disagree with what you said. And he said, and he was teaching me, he said, Jonathan, it's okay if we disagree here. I had this moment of we all have to be loving each other and agreeing every moment. I allowed there to be healthy conflict, and it was a lovely moment. And it was actually a moment of validation that the space was safe enough for us to have healthy conflict. So I'm noticing what I continue to be attached to and how I facilitate and in my ego. And I continually ask myself to let it go.
Beautiful point. And thank you for bringing that up, because I also came to believe that most of the facilitation work is actually based on self-work. How
Totally.
can we make sure to listen with curiosity? How can we actually, when we're expecting the group to have an open and curious mind and not to judge, we have to lead by example and not judge the group for not being creative enough, for not being following enough, for not understanding enough, all these kind of judgments that we sometimes hold in our mind. And how can we work on ourselves not to be triggered?
We do a lot of work. I design a lot of experiences that are fueled from the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, who writes and speaks about psychological safety with Google and Harvard and so many others. And she talks about teams gelling when there is a healthy mix of both psychological safety and accountability. And when you have both, that's when groups grow and learn. If I have done my job and created a space as a facilitator where people feel like it's safe to let their guard down and also to fail, and they're also being held accountable. So in other words, it's not this big comfort zone, it's a learning zone. They're being held accountable, whether they arrive late and their tech is working, and are they interrupting and all those things? Are they violating the norms? If I've created a space where people feel like it's safe to fail, but I haven't given myself that gift, myself that freedom to fail as a facilitator, then I have indexed more for my ego than for learning. I do believe that facilitators have a higher call, a charge to make it about the participants and to model. But over time, I very intentionally let my own guard down, and I like publicly failing and then asking, what did we learn there, or how'd that go? And when genuine human connections are made between myself and participants, Miriam, participants are eager to support me and tell me it's okay. Like, we still love you. And, I think there's an anxiety that comes with it's got to be perfect, or I'm getting paid to do this. And to me, the best facilitation comes in the awkward failing moments, the learning moments, the we've let down moments. I failed you. Or when people break the norm. I led an early session years ago for Circl.es where somebody had to come clean that somebody had repeated, a story to their wife. And it was this kind of make or break moment. Is this going to break the trust that we built in session 1? Because this was very early. Or is it going to be mortar between the bricks? Is it going to build even more trust? And it did the latter. It fueled more safety and bonding. And that's because I held the space for people to be candid. It wasn't about me. It was about the space that I held. And so I love those opportunities. I'm more interested in when things get uncomfortable than in things going picture perfect. Which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree, because it's through failure, it's through discomfort and conflict that we actually learn about the situation, about ourselves, about what we're actually speaking about. And I tend to believe that if a session just ran too smoothly and everyone agreed and we had this happy, funky, glowy, whatever workshop, what have we missed? What opportunity, what didn't we talk about? What has not remained revealed? And it asks for courage to get there.
One of my favorite questions I'll offer in a Circle session is, what are you not saying? What is the thing you're not saying? Or are we blindly agreeing and offering plus ones, virtually to what the last speaker said? Are we more interested in comfort and alignment over learning and healthy conflict? And I'll find moments to ask that question. What is that thing you're not saying? And it will almost every time make it possible for someone to share something they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. And I wonder whether it's not only what are we not saying, but also what are we not asking? Because it's, I read this fantastic book about the brain. And the book was called You Are Not Listening, and Why Does It Matter? And it was a lot about how the brain works. And one of the arguments why we are not listening was by asking questions and listening, we face the danger of being confronted something that will threaten our inner beliefs and identity. So if I ask a question that would help me to really understand, I might actually unveil something that I disagree with. And in order to avoid that, I tend to agree because I make out of your words something that conforms with my reality and my understanding, and say, yes, I totally agree. And then we are all good. If I had asked the question to really understand what you meant, I would have found out that actually we don't agree at all.
A cousin to that is storytelling over giving advice. To me, it's even more elemental. I totally agree with what you shared. And there's something even more elemental under that, Miriam, which is, can I take the risk and have it not be about me for a minute? Asking a question, being genuinely curious about another human requires me to put my own agenda and my ego on hold and have the focus be on another and another's experience and another's questions and another's insecurities. In other words, what might your life look like if you were one of many and it wasn't about you? I feel like there's a very healthy, natural human instinct. I feel this in myself, to want my own pain and suffering and story to be the news of the moment. I need it to be looked at. I need to be validated, acknowledged. And that's beautiful. And in a group, when it's 6 to 8, 9 people, I also am one of many. It can be very fiercely about me for 4 minutes. And then guess what? Then it's about the next person. Something about questions gets us in the healthy habit, the muscle memory of a leadership skill, being genuinely curious about another person. The relationship between storytelling and advice is similar. When I tell advice, I'm inspired by what you were saying. When I give you advice, I need you to make the same choice I made so that my own life choices are validated. I've made it about me. You feel that one? This came to me like in an early session years ago, and I was like, oh, I think that's correct. I think that's, at least from my own experience. When I tell a story, I put the person whose challenge is being explored in a witness place. I let them off the hook for a few minutes. I let their mind rest. We all love a good, colorful story. They can hear several first-person experiences shared from the circle, from which they can choose a course of action or not, as they wish. If I take action as a result of you giving me advice, Miriam, then I somehow have less agency in what comes of the choice. And if it blows up in my face, I'll come back to you the next session saying, thanks a lot, Miriam. I did what you told me to do, and it all went to hell. Thanks very much. In other words, I've made it your fault. Yeah. If I hear your story about how a similar challenge had gone for you and what you did, and I choose to take action, well, now that's on me. I've been empowered by hearing your story. I take responsibility for the choices I make in response to hearing the stories of my peers. It's subtle, but so powerful. And I like that you've reminded me of this distinction between what are you not saying and what are you not asking.
Yeah.
It's similar. So thank you for that.
And maybe to add just one more thought to what you just said, and then hopefully we'll find kind of the way around to talk about circle conversations. What I also realized is that when we're giving advice, the best thing we can do is to write it down for ourselves. Because as you said, if I'm giving advice, I'm using my own experience to kind of put it onto the plate of someone else, expecting them to not only have had the same experience or the same story in the past that would lead to the current challenge to which I give them advice, but also that this same way of dealing with it would help them solve it, which doesn't make sense at all, because usually the challenges are so different. Why would my way of dealing help someone in the same way? That's totally egocentric. But if I think that giving advice to others helps us a lot to actually reflect on our own experiences, because there's something going on when we listen to someone else's challenge. We want to bond, identify. So we listen, but we process this information based on our own experience. And then whatever comes out of our mouth is actually the stuff that we need to deal with much more than the other.
I've also find that I guess I'm just paraphrasing what you said, that the majority of advice that I do hear coming at others in a circle experience is stuff that the person giving it, it's probably something they've not mastered. They're wishing it for themselves. There's a little bit of projection going on.
Yeah.
I tell my guides all the time, when addressing norms being violated or somebody giving advice rather than telling a story, is acknowledge the intention, but address the behavior. I should have bumper stickers made.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, you're not making the person wrong. And it's so important to acknowledge the place from which that advice came from. It came from a good place. Maybe unconsciously it came from an ego-driven place, but in the end, people that we genuinely care about, we wish good things for. And so I like to appreciate, Jane, I get that I really heard the empathy and the compassion underneath the advice that you gave to Charles. Could you phrase that more as how that worked out for you, having made that choice as opposed to a prescription for him? It's subtle, but beautiful. Rewording it gets them in a mindset of serving rather than making it about them. The words are not semantics. They're important to me, using I statements, even giving advice. I'll put guardrails on that. I'll say, could you start your share with, if I were you, I would. Now, those are I statements. That's different than you should. It's subtle. We all take in so much information all day, Miriam, that we have to have filters. We can't possibly deeply take in everything coming at us. When one is given advice, when I'm giving advice, I'm naturally a little bit on the defensive. Well, I've now put a blocker between me and community engagement, belonging, togetherness, trust, safety. I have to put up blockers because I go through my whole life with everyone telling me what I should do. We all do, in my judgment. And so can we overcome the instinct to defend ourselves by reframing our wish for another from advice to storytelling?
I love that. Thank you so much for pointing that out. And yes, please print bumper stickers.
T-shirts. I'll have it crocheted on a pillow. Thank you. I didn't expect to get into that. That's interesting. And as you can see, I'm a talker. I like listening. But I wrote a blog post for Circl.es recently. I'm turning 50 this December. And I feel a little bit of an urgency around this work. And so I do notice when I get flushed in my cheeks and I feel myself going on and on, because being facilitated, being in a small group. I did my first wilderness experience in 2000, which is crazy to say, is 21 years ago. And I have never to this day been listened to as intently and as lovingly as I was by the guides that held us for 10 days. It was a 10-day wilderness program. And the centerpiece was a 4-day, 4-night fast. And then we came off the mountain and we sat in council together. And each of us had a chance, each of the fasters had a chance to tell our story. And to this day, I've never felt like my story was as welcomed, as wanted, was as worthy, and that I had it reflected to me in such a gorgeous way. It's kind of hard to put into words, but I've apprenticed in that work as well, rites of passage work, which I feel all facilitation is really at its core, rites of passage work. There's our threshold moments. These are milestone moments. These are moments where someone who wants the best for you turns to you and says, now, what are you going to do with this? And then make the space for you to not know, or to be in tears, or to say that thing that you've long held but never said. And that's what facilitation does. It makes it possible at its most core level, something that might not otherwise be possible.
And what changed this experience for you as a listener yourself?
I am intermediate at listening. I'm not an expert in very many things, but I got a little bit better on how to listen with a focus on the speaker instead of myself. I didn't listen for what I could say in response. I listened with, I mean, it's so trite even to say like to listen with curiosity or curious questions, but it's true. I listened trusting that I had instincts to hear something underneath the share. I'm picking up on something. And it's not that I was trying to analyze anybody, but I listen now with, I'm trying to get in touch with, how shall I say, there's a version of a share that people wish to offer. And then there's the version that they're hoping you hear. Does that make sense? There's the words that they say because they know it's palatable. But I sometimes feel somebody like dying for me to hear this thing underneath their share. That's what I've gotten in the study of. I've gotten in the habit of listening for the thing under the thing without it being analytical or therapeutic. I've tried to connect at a very human level of, I have a hunch that I'm really hearing you say this, like, or it seems to me that, or can you tell me more about, I'm learning a little bit, Miriam, about putting myself on hold to really serve someone else, making the space for someone's maybe unattractive share to find fertile ground. I mean, that's what a marriage is about. And I'm not an expert at that. That's what being a parent is about. And I have a lot to learn. That's what friendship's about. Yeah. I'm learning and failing.
Yeah. And then being safe enough that this is okay and that your partner will tell you. What I'm training based on or reflecting on what you said is to halt and reflect, why is this person telling me that? And very often we judge or we answer or we put on our own story. But to just pause for a moment and think, why did this person now spend 10 minutes telling me about their day that I find utterly boring, maybe? And I might feel annoyed because this person is wasting my time telling me about every single detail of their day. But why are they telling me that? And then something beautiful may emerge just because it creates this moment of empathy, of real empathy. Maybe this person hasn't talked to anyone for the whole day. Maybe they would just want to share this with me. Maybe they want to show off a little bit because they appreciate me. So there's suddenly all these layers that we can pull off that help us to go beyond the judgment of, what do you want from me now?
Yeah, so well said. There's also something about an instinct I've noticed a lot of facilitators have at the start, that there are right shares and wrong shares, that there's a proper way to show up, and they have judgments, or they qualify a participant's share. And believe me, I have my moments where I'll suggest to somebody, you know, well, could you share that in a first person, or could you say more about the emotion you felt at that moment? I'll double click on things, but I won't make their share wrong. There's a great poem called "The Invitation," which you may know. It's written by a poet called Araya Mountain Dreamer, that is read very often at the start of a twice-a-year men's gathering in the Berkshires Mountains of Massachusetts that I've been going to since, I don't know, 1997, I think. And one of the lines in this poem says, "It doesn't even matter to me if what you're saying is true." And there's something I've always remembered, that of like, have I given you the gift of creating space for you? When I create a Circl session, I have an icon that I have 3 norms I talk about: commit, contribute, and keep it confidential. And for the longest time, I had an icon that represented each of them. And the one that represented contribute was a gift. It was a wrapped present. And I would tell people, when you share deeply, it's a gift you give to yourself and others in the circle. But the same is true of the guides I certify. I say, as a facilitator, the space that you create for someone to share, whether you agree with them or not, whether you think they're, you know, full of it or not, is a gift. You've given them the gift. I had I'm taking hard turns here, but I had a friend that I worked with 25 years ago committed suicide on Sunday. And I can't help but think, what if more spaces were created for him? Who knows? But those that have made the spaces for me have saved me. Not that I got to that point, but I think I'm a version of myself today that would not have been possible if the elders in my life didn't take time to endure me, to endure my arrogance and ego and all the things that are true about me and all of us, and allow me to find my own way in spaces that were intentionally created for me. So I'm thinking of my friend Chad today.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's then also a way, as a facilitator, in creating these spaces to give back and to help others not to get to that point, and even if it's just a small contribution.
When I came off that Vision Fast experience in 2000, I thought, how can I bring this from the mountain back to Manhattan, where I was living at the time? And it was about ceremony, and it was about this ritual space, which you've created for us today. You're doing it right now, and you do it very gently and purposefully and thoughtfully. And I'm learning from you today. And I thought, one of the only accepted ways that there is ceremony in modernity is weddings, celebration. So I started doing non-denominational wedding ceremonies. And it was ritual. Ritual spoke to me. Facilitation is ritual time. It's ceremony time. It's in between time. You've just come off a tactical meeting. You have another one at the end of this hour. But for this moment, we're going to show up in a different way. There are norms that guide this time. There's going to be an extraordinary experience that asks you to show up in an extraordinary way. It's the same is true when I lead a wedding, or I do a rite of passage ceremony, or baby blessing, or whatever it may be, which I love that work. I haven't had time to do a lot of it in recent years, but it's, can we pause, let our minds rest, and to step into something that wants to happen? When I walk into a room, physical or virtual, my mindset is, what needs to happen here? I used to go with a friend of mine that lives on Cape Cod to homes where people were living with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. his whole world, his job, his foundation for years would be going into these homes and supporting families living with ALS. And the first time I got to the first door of the first house, I was about to go in, and he grabbed my shoulder and he said, take a second, let your agenda go, and be in the mindset of what needs to happen in this room. And I've never forgotten that, what my friend Ron has told me. And facilitation of a business meeting, a workshop, a deeper forum session, it's the same thing. It's the same skill set that I hope I'm taking into parenting, into the organizations I volunteer with, into my marriage, and I'm on the path of learning. But wax on, wax off, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what is it about the circle that facilitates this kind of connection, trust, that facilitates deeper conversations?
The Circl.es technology predates COVID, predates the pandemic. We work with communities, companies, organizations, schools to bring intentionally sized groups together for structured, facilitated conversations. The first hallmark of a Circl.es session is that it's a conversation, not a presentation. That right there is a vetting point for many potential customers. The world of webinars and presentations leads to, as I was saying earlier, a little bit of a defensive, or I'm taking in there's only so much I can take in. It's an absorption paradigm. The real magic is in synthesis, application, conversation, debate, healthy conflict. The Circl.es technology was meant to democratize and scale the very human instinct to want to hold space for powerful conversations. We worked with some of the biggest corporations on the planet, and our clients, which were in learning development departments or HR, would have conversations with me about what is the return on their investment? What's the tangible outcome? What's the ROI? And I was able to point to that, but I would also say, in other words, what needles did we make move on some hard skills, right? We would drip in content. We would revisit themes from manager training, let's say, and then have them become a community of practice to get better on certain skills that would be measured in end of year evaluations. It was that. And also I would point to our debriefs, our surveys that would say the number one reason why people would rate a Circl session highly was a sense of belonging. Mm. And I said, I would say to my team, I would say to our CEO, I said, we're in the belonging business. We're in the human connection business, if we decide to be. And we've decided to lean into that. So the technology is small but mighty. The feature set is small but powerful. And it allows people to more quickly lay facilitators who don't get certified by me, but may go through a one-off training session because they work inside a corporation, or they'll have reviewed some materials that I wrote asynchronously and gone through, let's say, a click tour. My goal, my mindset, Miriam, is what is the minimum journey someone can go through to facilitate the basics for the most powerful conversation. So our feature set is necessarily small, but gets the job done. It makes the space possible for an atypical experience where you're in conversation, not being presented to. And more than anything, you have an equal voice, or at least the space has been made for every voice to have equal airtime opportunity. Now, whether you say yes or not is on you. But think about how the world's gatherings would be changed if people simply had as equal a chance as the next person to share. Just that. We've created technology that helps make that happen at scale.
Thank you for, I had to smile a few times because I intended to ask the question to start with, what is it about the circle, kind of sitting in a circle? So even a step before the technology and your tool that you were explaining. And I found it beautiful how actually the two now merge.
Yes.
But maybe just to take one step back for the audience. So this tool, the Circl technology, is basically a video conferencing tool where all the participants join as a circle and join a circle. And then it does exactly what you described. And I wonder, what is it? So you're referring to some deep instincts of human beings that you amplify through your tool, where, as you said, you go from presentation to sharing to belonging. And maybe that's, I'm thinking out loud now, if you sit in a circle, there is no space for presentation. There is no space for advice. There's only space for storytelling, right? So we sit around a campfire. That's a space for storytelling. And we sit in rows or in lines to watch a presentation.
Yes. We'll speak often about, part of our mission statement is creating more opportunities for humans to be in circles, not rows. We're not interested in supporting a one-to-many dynamic. Not that that doesn't exist. We're saying that can exist, but then consider maybe 15 minutes in a webinar by your CEO and then bring them into circles for synthesis and conversation. We're not saying no rows. We're saying circles is a great complement to rows, and what might the planet look like if there were more circles? Something as simple as the geometry of our technology enables what you're describing. We're circles sitting in circles, like a wedding ring with no beginning and no end. Therefore, there's no hierarchy. I mean, I'm very rarely on Zoom, but when I am, I'm always conscious of, am I in row 3? Oh, I'm in row 4. Am I close to the organizer? Or, I mean, there's this inherent hierarchical analytical way that our cognition approaches the geometry of a virtual session that we've chosen to do away with. So often people will say, well, there's circles, but can the circles be in a row so I can fit 24 of them? And we'll say, no. Circles of circles reinforces the intended experience. And that's what I mean by a small and mighty and, and very purposeful feature set. Everything kind of goes through this vetting of, are we serving the mission and the intended conversation through this tech suggestion or not? Has it become about the bells and whistles? And has it overshadowed the conversation? Or is the technology, can it be the ghost in the machine, the thing that's like a good, like someone holding the space at a wedding ceremony, where it's about the couple. And if the minister or whoever has done their job, they're making it possible for it to be about the couple. But without the minister, it wouldn't be so. And I feel like the technology facilitates as much as I do as a person.
That's beautifully put. And I think that's something that many facilitators still after 1.5 years in the pandemic are very little aware of, that it's not that the technology we're using, the platform, is one part of the overall experience and facilitates or enables or even harms the kind of conversations we are trying to have.
Do you think that's, that's been your own experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the technology can impact the conversation intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah,
you choose as an experienced designer. So I hold a few roles at Circl.es. I'm not just the lead facilitator, but I head up like designing experiences for our clients, our companies, organizations, communities. And so I talk about design and facilitation. It's hard for me to talk about one without the other. The facilitators delivering a planned experience, which may go a different way, but hopefully there was some blueprint. And the design can't live in a bubble of only the design thinking. It has to be done with a mindset of how it's going to be rolled out. So I love that I wear both of these hats, and where this overlaps is with the technology. Can we be intentional about the technology, because it's going to impact the conversation whether you like it or not? Just like when I'm leading in person, sometimes people, like when I do these weekends in the Berkshires, my partner and I, my buddy Brandon, he'll make fun of me because I spend as much time thinking about the lighting and how many logs are on the fire and what's the temperature of the room as I do what we're all going to say. To me, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And you can have an impact unconsciously or consciously.
Mm. So what would be the equivalent of the temperature in the room and the lighting in the online space for you?
Yeah, I call it circle hygiene. Are you backlit or not? Sometimes if you wear white, it can be, kind of a blare to others. Have you made space to be in as quiet a space as possible? Are you on good internet? Have you removed blockers to engagement? Have you done everything you can to overcome any obstacle to someone feeling like the space is safe? At its most basic level, Miriam, that would be that's how I hold it. So there are technical cues, like I'm saying, lighting and those kind of things. But there's also like, as you so wonderfully modeled, you took a couple of moments before we met today because you knew that if you didn't get your breaths, if you didn't take your time, it would impact how you showed up at the top of our time. You gave me the gift of doing what you needed to do so you could be present and full and here. I also, as you were saying earlier, I do my work on the side so that I don't bring it to my circle. Now, I have a lot of circles. I've been leading some of them for years where they invite me in and I do share at certain parts of the meeting of the planned agenda, the session, but I also know where the line is for me innately. I help make it safe for others by doing what I need to do for the most part, emotionally, psychologically, physically, biologically, before the session begins.
And I would be particularly interested in your experience or your take on two aspects, which one is music and the
Yeah.
other one is video. So how do you play or use these two tools in order to create the atmosphere and to spark the conversations that you wish for?
I can't tell you how many clients of ours have at first meeting with me thought they could simply translate their in-person experience to digital with no amendments to either the design or the facilitation. That is usually a pretty short conversation. One thing, people don't have the stamina to be on a 4-hour small group experience. I've done them before, but I planned them out with 2 breaks, etc. So it's not a one-to-one experience. Video comes with its own bag of considerations. Am I able to read the body language as much online as I would be in person? Like, I can shift my feet now and you can barely tell that I'm doing it. I've gotten pretty good. My spidey sense, I've gotten pretty good at people's body language. Another aspect of video that I track, and I do this just kind of innately, but now I train for it and I'm still learning, is the use of the camera. Right now I'm looking right in the camera. At Circl.es, we've purposely made each member, I don't know if you know this, I think I told you this in a one time when we chatted, you're always at 6 o'clock on your circle.
Mm-hmm.
Why? The logic being that as many of the participants that aren't you to be as close to your laptop's camera as possible increases the likelihood that they'll have more of your eye contact than not. So right now so in addition to that, right now as a facilitator, I'm gotten good. I'm looking at the camera, but I can sense with peripheral vision what you're doing. I find moments to make eye contact. I don't do it all the time, but I've gotten judicious about these moments. So that's one way that I use video to my advantage instead of my disadvantage. On the audio front, I do consider music an element of energy and flow. If I talk about energy, timing, and flow for facilitation, the complement on design is a U-shaped agenda, reflections after prompts. So a U-shaped agenda, powerful prompts, and time to consider the prompts in reflection. That's what I counsel out when it comes to design. When I talk about a U-shaped agenda, what I mean is something that starts up here, right? Music, welcoming. We're going to do a check-in. We're going to go down. We're going to do some meaty work, and then we're going to come back up.
So, and on the y-axis would then be energy, and on the x would be time? Or...
I haven't plotted out. There's probably something like that that's possible. You and I maybe could work on that, but I haven't plotted out that. I haven't done the overlay that concretely. It's because I I am mindful and infuse energy, timing, and flow throughout. It's not so chunked for me. There are aspects of energy, timing, and flow that impact my U-shaped
Mm.
design, that impact the type of question I did a session yesterday where I had a planned question and then 60 seconds to consider it.
Yeah. What
And
I
I threw it all that out in the moment. I rewrote the prompt and did 30 seconds because I was responding, but it was still, it was on the map. It was on the map of this U-shaped agenda.
And I wonder, so sorry, I didn't ask my question properly. So I was wondering, what is the U shape? So when you say you start up here, you go down and up again.
Mm-hmm.
Is it energy that starts up here, or is it interaction, or which goes down? So what is on the y-axis?
Yeah, I would say it's the depth of the conversation is what's
Mm.
being mapped by
Ah.
the U. So in other words, the human mind has a warm-up period.
Mhm.
You can't come off a tactical meeting with your marketing team and go right into a circle session where the opener is, tell me about a time you were betrayed as a child. I mean, we can't go there cognitively. We're still going to have our masks on from the last meeting. We need to, hold on, give me a minute here. So I do like engaging icebreakers. I've changed my philosophy around icebreakers, which I don't even use that term anymore. I just say opening prompts. But there is a cognitive like map that you're going to have the most effective deep work if you get there via a ramp, not from a cliff. We
Mm.
can't, I don't want to waste those precious middle minutes warming up to it. I want to get there solidly from a very well-designed top of session experience. And then the synthesis, the outcome, the integration is just as critical for me. You don't want to end with people having open wounds. So I like to make sure we wrap in as good a way as possible. And it's always imperfect. I lead many, many sessions that get emotional, and I work hard to move a grain of sand down the beach. This is as much as we could have done today. It's imperfect, but we did what we could. It's like yoga. We'll come back. I'll see you the next time. But I like to end it at least so people feel somehow safe and psychologically whole to be able to go into their day feeling like they had an outcome, a takeaway, but there's more to do. So the U-shaped has served me. It has served the work I intend for the middle, and it served the people that are coming in with busy schedules and are on their way to something else after. Does
Mm.
that make more sense?
Absolutely. And it
Thanks.
just reminded me once again that when we say words, we all have our different thoughts around it, depending on what's in our mind. So I'm an economist. When I hear
You're right.
U-shaped, I think of an
Right.
x-axis and a y-axis. And then I want to know what plots the U-shape. When you think of or circles, I think of a circle. And you think, of course, of your technology. So it's so important to keep that in mind, where we're coming from and who our audience is when we're asking questions and making statements. So I'm actually grateful for these slight misunderstandings, because it just makes it so clear. And yes, it makes total sense, because now I understand that by the U-shape, it's basically the depth of the conversation that you cannot start deep. You need to start wherever the people are coming from. Then you can go deep, but then you also have the responsibility to close these wounds and to leave them. Not with this deep kind of feeling where you need, I think, if I understand you correctly, this moment, the lowest part of the U is basically where you open up, where you're vulnerable, and where you need then the circle, the community, the sense of belonging. And then you need to come out there in order to step out of the space and be a normal human again.
Yeah, I mind for vulnerability all along the way. I go out of my way not to pigeonhole vulnerability as something that we're going to do. It's more a way that we're going to be. And I like vulnerability in opening check-ins. I like vulnerability in what you got out of the session, as well as like responses to post-session notes. So vulnerability is one of these skills, like curious questions, like listening, like holding space, modeling, sensing, and responding, that we're never going to perfect. But I say who people are in Circle is a mirror of who they are in work and life.
Mm.
And it's a practice room. It's a sandbox. It's the dojo. There's a lot of analogies I could say. It's the practice room where we get to try on being that kind of person.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that has effect or opportunities, or makes it a little bit smoother for us to be more of that person in more rooms of our lives. That is my goal. Is a circle session should almost be a little bit like a training, a meta training. Through the structure and through the space that I make possible, you're given permission to be a little bit different version of yourself. And perhaps you'll find that the world didn't end, and then you'll feel more inspired to be more of that person in other rooms, in that next tactical meetings, at the dinner table, etc.
Absolutely. And still, I believe that these skills, as you call them, we cannot take them for granted for everyone who's stepping into the room, and especially vulnerability and the ability to ask questions and to have a curious mindset is, I think, especially for me, as I spend more and more time just within this bubble of facilitators, I sometimes forget how the real world works. And I think this is, it's important to remind ourselves of that being vulnerable and having the courage to show this vulnerability is nothing that we can expect everyone who steps
Totally.
into our space to have. And that expecting that and not respecting that some might not feel as comfortable with that might actually put people off and destroy this sense of safety. If I'm pushing someone with an opening question too far off the cliff, that they sense, okay, tell me about your deepest childhood traumata. This can change the entire energy of the session.
I have long lists of opening questions and music tracks and visual breathing meditations, which we can actually play a video in the center of the circle. These are all simply tools. I don't ever prescribe it without asking the open question to a client who's designing the experience with me. Tell me the disposition with which your people will enter the room. Are they a meeting heavy culture? Is vulnerability part of your corporate structure? I need to learn before I can design for them, obviously. We also, I appreciate that you're sensitive to speaking to a community of facilitators who are further to one end of this spectrum than maybe the folks that are participants in their experiences. We need to get past right and wrong, and we need to meet people where they are. I'm saying the word need, which is prescriptive, but I feel inspired to meet people where they are. I'll share one quick story. I worked with someone in our team when we started having these conversations. Said, I just want to tell you, it takes a lot for me to open up, and I find it really hard to be vulnerable. And it was the most authentic thing I have ever heard him say. And I will take that all day over him coming up with some contrived, produced childhood memory just so that he could check a box.
And it's almost ironic, because admitting that someone struggles with opening up and being authentic is so vulnerable and so open.
It's absolutely. That was my reflection to him.
And I totally agree that it's not about making people wrong, or that there's a right and wrong. And as you said in the beginning, it's the ability to opening up the space for any ways of being, as long as people are. I think the most important is that people are authentic, and then and to grow into the space.
Yeah. We also have munged a few terms in our culture, in my judgment: vulnerability, authenticity, courage, openness. I've indexed more for openness recently. It's a little more palatable. It's a little more it's a little more accessible term. Vulnerability implies a requirement to divulge, which is different than openness in my judgment. We live in a culture of disclosure. Here's on Facebook, here's everything I'm feeling. That is not as interesting to me as an authentic share. And so I've indexed more for openness in our discussions and in our materials. Authenticity. I mean, someone could be a stick in the mud and completely opt out, but they're being authentic. And if they can give a voice to it, I'll take that all day. And I'd love to click on that rather than someone putting on a mask and being who they think who I think they should be in the circle and playing a part. Because, you get out what you put in as a participant, but have I made it as safe as possible for you to be the version of you that you're choosing to be, knowing that what the group is basically a mirror. Okay, Daniel, here's who I'm seeing you to be. What are you seeing? And what do you wish to do with this? Participants, the reason why small groups are magic, one of the reasons, Miriam, is they act as a mirror. And something as simple as what you suggested, writing down the advice before you give it. Or as a facilitator, I'll scribe summaries of people's weekly updates in the chat. And for people to see it, wow, I said that, or this is the 4th week in a row. I've shared that as my most urgent and important thing. I didn't realize I've been saying that. If I watch this recording, which I won't do because I can't stand to watch myself, I know that it'll be a mirror for me about how much I'm talking, and I will be judging myself. Now, that's work for me to both talk less and judge myself less, but mirrors are what help us learn and grow. And the best mirrors to me have been people who deeply want the best for me and will hold the space for me to show up imperfectly, unattractively, but in my authenticity.
Yes, so much to unpack. And one thing that I want to reflect on is your example of you watching back this video and then judging yourself. And then, because I think the way how we judge ourselves is also, yes, it is, this video is a mirror, but only of your own perception of yourself.
Totally.
So I invited you to interview you. So yes, of course you speak a lot. This is why you're here. That's the sole purpose of you being in this show, is to speak a lot, right? Otherwise I would have a solo show. And the other one is that I think, and that's another challenge, I think, for the times we're living in, is to also accept ourselves, not only the parts of ourselves that we want to work on our continuous aim for self-improvement, but also to embrace and to accept and acknowledge and be proud of the things that we're doing well.
Celebration.
Yes. And that it's okay. And it doesn't mean that you're an arrogant bastard if you just acknowledge and are proud or whatever about the things you're doing well. And this could be a nice practice. So I would be curious if you could actually watch this video with the open mind and empathy that you would actually ask participants or your guides who go through your training.
The way that choosing to do this has pushed me is I sit with people, not spreadsheets. I mean, I look at my fair share of spreadsheets, but I work with people. I support and allow space for people. And I get immediate and direct validation that I'm of value in the world. Now, am I willing to take that in? Now, this is a Jonathan issue. This isn't, but I'm saying the mirror of how I've chosen to make my money and spend my day gives me the chance to look right at that. And so I feel like in some ways, the medicine, and I mean that in a good way, the teaching, the learning, the intelligence that's available to me through the medium of facilitation has revealed to me my life's work. And no one can do that work for me but me. Just like in a Circl session, the work that somebody comes to realize or becomes aware of is theirs fully and wholly. And we can offer support and guidance and counsel and experience sharing. But at the end of the day, we cannot do this work for you. And also none of us can do it alone. So I have loved the kind of meta learning of, wow, I've chosen to do this thing that's put my own work right in front of me. Well, isn't that exactly how life is supposed to be? Like I've chosen the absolute perfect, hardest thing for me as someone who struggles with, desperately wants acknowledgement and struggles taking it in. I mean, I've set myself up for quite a time here,
It's the beauty of this profession. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
too much presentation, not enough synthesis. Participants not feeling like the facilitator has their back. And I'll give you a very concrete example. If I say we're all going to get to share, but I don't make that possible, I've lost not just the credibility of the group, but I've lost their trust. I've lost their willingness to share the next time. So to me, workshops are only as powerful as there is a synthesis and application and discussion round. I don't really participate in any webinars if there isn't an application or a discussion element following it. So, you know, for a long time we discussed, are we in the better meetings business? Are we in the better conferencing business? And we realized we're in the conversation business. We're not interested in a better way to present materials. We can do that, but the point for us isn't a workshop's materials. It's what happens once you close that document and you open up the floor for discussion. So without that element, to me, a workshop becomes yet another opportunity for someone's ego to get stroked or someone to feel like they're super important. I don't know. Those are my judgments. And also, like, the word workshop is held so many different ways, Miriam. If there isn't a practicum aspect, if there isn't a synthesis, a reflection aspect, then it's skill building, which is great. Then it becomes like a MOOC, an online course, and that's fine. The world needs those, but I'm interested in a diversity of viewpoints on the content that was shared.
And I think that's also the beauty. If we are not giving a chance for every voice to be heard and to contribute, we're missing out on such a learning opportunity, I think. And that's where what you said really resonates with me. That if it's just a presentation, then it's maybe a training, maybe a MOOC, but it's not a workshop.
And here's this great thing I'm pushing out into the world, right? Like, I used to struggle a lot with people putting their eyes on my work. And in the last couple of years, I've gotten very clear on others help make my work better. And a workshop that has a diversity of opinions about what was shared makes that content better for the next iteration of that workshop. Like, there's only one reason why you wouldn't want comment on your work. It's ego. Yeah. Now, not everybody is as careful with their opinions and feedback. And some people use a feedback round as a chance to make it about themselves and stroke their own ego. There's a shadow side to opening it up. So I do have guardrails on that, but there is a version of a workshop that's a one-to-many experience that is about sometimes glorifying the person at the front of the rows in a wireless headset. That the world needs those to a certain extent, but that's not what's held me up over the years, and it's not where I find my joy now. We work with TED as well, and I love TED Talks so very much, and they've got it right because they have a one-to-many component, but then they have TED circles for synthesis and discussion and creating an action plan. And that, to me, is like, that's the perfect 1-2 punch. That's the combination that I feel like workshops could do more of.
I didn't know that TED was doing that.
Yeah, TED circles, they're called.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
It's beautiful.
Nice. I haven't asked a question, but I always have this do-it-yourself kind of question. What's your favorite exercise? And maybe I can phrase it differently. What would you advise someone who wants to start with having more authentic, vulnerable, open, however we want to call them, circle conversations, or conversations full stop, not as opposed to sitting in a row conversations?
The simplest nugget, I guess, the atom, the molecular, if you want to make it that analogy, the atom of circles, or maybe it's the electron, is what we call a round. And what that means for me, where energy, timing, and flow is encapsulated and where design and facilitation come together, is a powerful prompt time to consider the prompt, so reflection, and whether you play music during that minute or 30 seconds or not, that's fine. And then a random order or equal opportunity to respond to the prompt where their shares are timed. If you do nothing else, think about how transformative your gatherings might be if you did that. So that's to me where the worlds of design and facilitation come together.
And what makes a good prompt?
Well, it depends what you're designing for and what the outcome is, but it should be probing, and if it's thematic, should relate to the content. When I design thematic journeys, I will relate the prompt to the content they just digested, which we can do synchronously, but I'm not married to it. I'm not tied to it. It can find its own direction and be a springboard for surfacing a challenge or an opportunity that has actually nothing to do with the content by the end of the session. So it should put guardrails. A prompt should have framing, because the mind needs limits within which it can have radical freedom and be a little bit clearer. I do lead sessions where I say, what's urgent and important to you today? Those are great. And people like just checking in on where am I at with personal and work and relationships. But I do love some of these thematic modules that I've designed, which have prompts that give boundaries within which I can give creative answers. So name a time a lack of psychological safety negatively impacted cohesion on your working team. That's pretty specific, and also allows me to be reflective and specific, and have my response be a story, not a theory. I can serve the group by offering a specific response that they can latch onto. Oh, I felt that same way. Oh, I used to have a boss that was like that. It's the best prompts solicit responses that are catalysts for further conversation. They get the ball rolling, and then then the prompts recede into the background, and then it becomes about the answers and the next part of the agenda. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The best prompts move you along and don't stop you.
And they create bonding because you can relate to each other on a rather emotional, or at least human level.
Yeah, I know I put a lot of energy in an initial Circl.es experience that's based on building trust and psychological safety. I have a one-time exercise. There's several of them, but it's a distinct agenda from all the subsequent agendas that are meant to address challenges and opportunities. But what I always say when I get into a recurring agenda structure is we're only building on what we did at the beginning. You started, waxing on, waxing off on trust and psychological safety, vulnerability, accountability. Guess what? The structure, every time we get together, have opportunities to go deeper on those things. Curious listening, holding space. So you're never done. And the best conversations, the best designed experiences allow people to go deeper on these core skills. And then hopefully you get to them, they become advanced,
Yeah.
And then they want to take it home and take it into their communities. And
that's where our work as facilitators is so impactful, because it potentially has a network effect that those who have experienced that want to bring it to the other parts of their life. And then it just grows.
Yes. A network effect for our business development department. Of course, they want more sales and they want to go viral, but a network effect behaviorally. I would not be the husband and father and community member that I am if I wasn't taking what was given to me as a gift as a participant years ago and paying it forward. And by the way, I can always be a better husband, father, community member, but I think I'm getting clearer on what would make me better in those realms. And it's because people have given me the space to realize it.
And also accepting that sometimes we're just good enough.
Oh, that's a nice reminder. Thank you.
What would be your gift to the listener who might have zoned in and out of our conversation, struggled focusing, and now they are all fully present? What would you like them to take away from our conversation?
I wish that people that are feeling that they're resonating with this conversation act on a prompting. What's one concrete thing you can do to create space, to make space in your life for the most critical conversations? What thing can you put aside in favor of being with your kids today when they come home from school or at the dinner table? Can people put their phones away? Can you light a candle? Can you ask instead of imposing? Can you let your kids pick out their clothes in the morning instead of telling them what they're going to wear? What can you do to make space, to allow space and make it about others? And I encourage you, if you're feeling inspired by this conversation, to act on that prompting before your email inbox overwhelms the rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for this
Thank you.
really meaningful conversation.
I appreciate it. We should do more sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Geeking out on facilitation, everything that relates to it.
And thank you for inviting me to the community and as a resident. And I'm really enjoying all that I'm reading and hearing. I appreciate it. And you're doing such good work.
Thank you. Dum, da, da, da. That's the end of the podcast jingle.